Good morning. Good morning. My name is Paul, and I'd like to welcome you to the worship service of the First Unitarian Church of Hobart, where we affirm together each week that love is the doctrine of this church, the quest for truth is its sacrament, service is its prayer, and this is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Since not everyone can attend in person, we are streaming this worship service online, and we extend a special welcome to all who are joining us virtually. The joys and sorrows portion of our service, however, is private, and we will temporarily pause the stream for that. Otherwise, this service is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on our website. I invite you now to enter sacred time, to make this time and this place sacred by our presence and intention. Please turn off or silence your devices, and as you do so, I invite you also to turn down the volume on your distractions, whether they are your fear or anxiety or the armor that you use to protect yourself from the world. You can do this as slowly as you need to. Breathe. Try to let go of any expectations, to drop any guilt or shame, and to trust in the possibility of forgiveness. Try to let go of those other things and be here, now, in this moment, so that you can start to walk the maze within your heart, guide your steps into its questioning curves. This labyrinth is a puzzle leading you deeper into your own truths. Listen in the twists and turns. Listen in the openness within all searching. Listen. A wisdom within you calls to a wisdom beyond you, and in that dialogue lies peace. As honorary Unitarian Universalist Albert Schweitzer noted, at times our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us. In that spirit of rekindling one another's sparks, please join together in lighting our chalice by reading together the words on the screen and in the order of service. We gather.
As people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs, we light this beacon of hope, sign our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
I invite you to open your gray hymnals to reading 627 for a responsive reading. This is by Unitarian Max Kutz. I will read the regular text. I invite you to join me in the italicized text. We need a celebration that speaks the spring-inspired word about life and death, about us as we live and die. Through all the cycling seasons, days, and years, we need the sense of deity to crack our own hard, brown December husks and push life out the inner tombs and outer pain. Unless we move the seasons of the self and spring can come for us, the winter will go on, and Easter will remain a myth, and life will never come again, despite the fact of spring. Sometimes in life we're prompted to sing a new song together, so let's practice doing that now, both embracing whatever discomfort might be in it for you and also bravely singing out so we can hear your voice. Turn to hymn number 217, O Sing Hallelujah, Rise in Body or Spirit, and join in song. Please be seated. Our worship services are a time to gather together in one space, to be together, to have a shared experience together. But there are also, of course, lots of non-shared experiences that we have throughout the rest of our lives. And we can choose to bring those into this space and bring them into voice and weave them together by letting folks know what's going on with us. And so I would invite anybody who would like to share a joy or a sorrow to raise your hand, to let me know to come to you with the mic, and just to share your name with us so that we know who you are as we embrace and welcome your joy and sorrow into our collective experience. Does anybody have a joy or a sorrow to share this morning? We Unitarian Universalists are a non-creedal faith. We don't have a set creed to which we are supposed to obey or continue to believe in or hold strong to. Instead, we are centered around covenant. And we have a few covenants in this congregation. And so one of the things that we've been doing each week is to re-covenant with each other. And there's a piece in our covenant around forgiveness. And the value of forgiveness is to bring something new into existence, to get out of the ruts that we have found ourselves in and to lean into that. And sometimes we're more ready for that newness, and sometimes we're less ready for it. And so sometimes we're just not ready to forgive, and that's totally fine. It doesn't need to happen on somebody else's time scale. But leaning into that possibility is incredibly valuable. And so I would invite you to join in our recovenanting this week. I'll read a few lines from our congregational behavioral covenant, and you can respond with the words that are up on the screen there. So please rise in body or spirit. For all the ways that we have neglected to consider our thoughts before speaking, communicate in a clear and positive manner, and to pause before acting, may we forgive ourselves and each other and begin again in love. For all the ways that we have neglected to speak directly to those concerned with an issue, offer and receive appropriate criticism and praise, and provide timely, specific, and clear feedback. May we forgive ourselves and each other and begin again in love. For all the ways that we have not been appropriately supportive of others without taking sides, may we forgive ourselves and each other and begin again in love. I invite you now to join in our congregational doxology to bring some music into that recovenanting. Please be seated.
Peter, who is just a country fisherman, follows Jesus at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. Twilight. He finds himself standing in the palace courtyard of the holy city, a very long way from home. It is the end of the line for him. Jesus has just been arrested by the Jerusalem authorities. His compañeros have fled for their lives. Peter, however, is trying to fulfill his vow to follow Jesus to the end. Having managed to slip into the courtyard, he tries to stay inconspicuous by chatting with the armed security guards. He's just outside the courtroom where Jesus is being arraigned, where he will shortly be charged and convicted of heresy and treason. Are they not the same thing? Near enough to hear Jesus' screams from the holding cell where he is being tortured during interrogation. Peter's sitting with the guards, warming himself at their fire. With each howl of pain, the veteran soldiers shake their heads. Peter winces, shivering. Shoulder to shoulder with them, the hood of his cloak obscuring his face, Peter tries to shake the chill. He stands gazing into the coals, numb with shock, terrified at this turn of events. He's uncertain what he is waiting for. We can only imagine the despair this villager from the north must feel at the fast and brutal descent of the big city's justice. Peter's tears start to well up and his stomach tightens as he thinks to himself, he told us the new order is dawning. But it has all come to this. He wonders if he might be dreaming. Dusk turns to deep night. The howls of pain from inside have stopped. A sneaky court has convened and the justice of the empire is being dispensed. Suddenly, at the very moment Jesus is condemned to be executed inside the palace, outside in the courtyard, Peter's cover is blown when a servant to the high priest recognizes him and calls out, "You too were with the Nazarene." This is Peter's moment of truth and consequences. The one Jesus promised would come sooner or later. Peter inches slowly backward toward the gate, responding, "I do not know what you are talking about." Squeezed by conflicting desires to, on the one hand, stay true to his cause, and on the other hand, to save himself, he makes a quick decision to try to save himself. He seeks refuge in the shadow world of denial, but Peter's country drawl betrays him. "A Galilean," snort those around the fire. For them, guilt by association is enough to convict. Peter's desperate backpedal does not work. He's both unable to stay true to his ideals and also unable to pass as an innocent bystander. And he begins to curse his life. Who wouldn't curse their life at such a dead end? Curse religion or politics or history or one's parents or friends or one's own choices. Curse everything that conspires to bring us to such moments. Finally, cornered and cowering, Peter swears, "I do not know this man you are talking about." It is almost dawn. A rooster's hoarse croon drifts hauntingly in the sudden stillness, then slowly, like a stake being driven into his heart, Peter's soul begins to implode, and he breaks down in bitter weeping. His inconsolable sobbing echoes through the ages, resonating whenever we have betrayed the vision we held dearest. Over the last 2,000 years, it has continued to well up as we struggle with not staying faithful to our own ideals.
So we are in the third week of this series on singing a new song, which was inspired in part by some ruminations I was having about the role of questions in Unitarian Universalism. There are various jokes that one learns as a child, and the only Unitarian jokes that I was familiar with as a kid were ones about various question marks of how do you scare off a Unitarian Universalist, or how does a Unitarian Universalist try to scare you off, or how do you know a Unitarian Universalist is in town, or various different varieties that involve burning a question mark in the lawn. And so there's this understanding that questions have a value in Unitarian Universalism. They present these beautiful opportunities for us to show up in all of our fullness, for our own fullness to encounter others, to find newer, truer ways of being with one another. Any of us, Unitarians, Unitarian Universalists or otherwise, can choose to lean into paths of uncomfortable challenge and growth or uncomfortable sameness. In this series, we're looking at these different possibilities and aiming to choose that first path, the one of choosing challenge and growth that is often uncomfortable. In the first week of this series, Cindy Hessman gave a wonderful example of being willing to do something uncomfortable, public speaking, for the benefit of the greater good, both in her stepping up to share her story with us during our worship service 2 weeks ago, and also her vivid description of how in the past she faced and handled the challenging questions and opportunities that were put to her by others. A student pointedly asking her how she would keep them safe, a fellow congregant inquiring what would our faith not be our faith without, and an invitation to share her personal story at the State House. In each of those instances, Cindy walked that path of letting herself be challenged to grow. And sometimes, even going so far as to do the thing that she thought that she couldn't do. And then last week, Sandy Waters offered us the challenge of possibility, having the moral imagination to see what needs to be done and to take up that responsibility, to ask ourselves, what am I doing here? What are we doing here? And to make a contract or a covenant with that moral imagination, being willing to embrace even possibilities that might have others question our sanity. So this week, we're following up with how what they talked about connects with our Unitarian Universalist perspective. But this is not a journey that we're going on as individuals, of course. I invite you to just look around the room and see these other people who are on this journey with you. Maybe wave your hands at these fellow travelers that are sitting in this space. Take a moment to welcome their presence and to offer your own presence to them, letting your warmth fill this space that we're occupying together. Our story this morning invites some reflection. And so I have something for you to think about, a question for you to think about for a few moments before getting to talk to some of these beautiful people that you're in this space with for just a few moments. So it's all too easy to lose track of what is really important to us, to not even realize the ways in which we have drifted from our values and instead prioritizing our own feelings of safety or freedom or some self-image. When have you not lived up to your own ideals? When have you sacrificed them or taken the easier path and not lived up to them? So we'll have the question up on the screen for you to consider to yourself for just a couple moments as Jeremy plays. And then once he's done playing, then I will invite you to share what your thoughts are with some folks sitting near you. So having given it some thought for just a few moments, I'm going to, in a second, invite everybody to very, very briefly discuss their response with one another. So briefly that you won't have time to have a full conversation. But that's totally fine, because this isn't meant to be social time. This is meant to be a spiritual practice with each other. At our best, we Unitarian Universalists have a beautiful way of being with each other, of bearing witness to each other's humanity. And so this is a chance to practice that. For just a couple of minutes, I will keep the time for about the same amount of time that you sat in contemplation. So you'll both offer and receive your answers to that question. So only have 2 minutes. So I recommend groups of 2 to keep it fairly small, groups of 3 at most, because you're not going to have enough time to talk. And I'll let you know when the time is up. Okay, that brings us to the end of our sharing time. And so I'd invite you to come to silence, and there might be something that you heard, there might be something that you said that stuck out to you, that you thought was particularly noticeable or interesting, or was something that tied into a value that you have, or a tension that you feel, or something that might have lit up something for you that you might not have thought before that began. And so is there one or two people who would be open to sharing that? Yeah.
I'm Stephanie. The thing that came to mind for me was that I'd like to think that one of my own ideals is to be not judgmental, but then sometimes I find myself being very judgmental. And not happy about that, but that's the reality. Yeah.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah.
Sometimes in school, I'm pretty good at math, but I don't really like math. So sometimes I doodle on my papers, but then I erase it, of course. But sometimes I just get distracted, and there was this one time, just once, where I got a C. And my ideal is either a B or an A, but at least a B.
Beautiful. Thank you, Violet. One more person? Yeah.
I noticed a theme in our conversation was about either not acting or not speaking up in the moment when we felt we should, but we didn't say that thing that would have better reflected our ideals, or taken that step that, regret. Yeah.
Thank you, Maggie. Yeah, and some other resonance over here. That was a similar other hands raised. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for joining in that, for sharing of yourselves in that reflection. I invite you now to open your gray hymnals to 396, Rise and Body Your Spirit, and join in our middle hymn.
There's a descant that we've been doing that's based on a fragment of a YouTube song. I will sing a new song, and I invite you to sing that as we have been playing for the last 2 weeks. I don't feel well.
Please be seated. So I am a child of the 1980s, and I was not one of those ones that was fortunate enough to have a parent buy me a video game system. So I rested on the graciousness of others to get to have that experience. My grandparents had an Atari, and my grandmother would play Centipede every morning. When I would get up in the morning, I'd go to the living room, she'd be playing Centipede first thing in the morning. That was her morning ritual. I preferred Frogger or Joust. Joust I thought was hilarious with all the ostriches bouncing all over the screen. And then the Nintendo came out, and there was a kid down the block who had a Nintendo system, and I got to play Super Mario Brothers at his place. I didn't like him very much, but I liked going over to his place to play Super Mario Brothers. And when I was in college, the video game Tomb Raider came out, which is this trailblazing one with this beautiful music and all of this adventure of exploring tombs like Indiana Jones. And then at some point, I was living with somebody who had an Xbox, and I got to explore Skyrim, which is this deeply immersive, amazing music and visuals. The actual story of the game is not that great, but the visuals are incredible, and the music is amazing, and I would just play that for hours and hours on end. And part of the draw of playing it for so long, it was such an immersive, beautiful environment, but part of the draw of doing that was also, it meant that I didn't have to show up to the relationship that I was in that wasn't working. At the time, I was working with a life coach. Every other week, we'd have a conversation for an hour, and a lot of those conversations were about what was not working in the relationship and how I might make it better or even fix it. And when the relationship finally ended, I could imagine my coach's relief after our year of conversations on such things of finally he's ready to let go of this thing that's clearly not working. It is a natural, understandable human tendency to get stuck in patterns, to come back to the familiar, to live life in a way that makes sense to our younger selves, to unconsciously resist what is on the horizon, even when what is familiar is unpleasant. Sometimes our attentiveness to the familiar can get in the way of actually being able to experience anything but the old, even in the face of newness. There are some people who they'll leave a job because they can't stand their boss, and they go to the next job, and somehow they have the same boss that they had at the previous job. Or they leave a relationship that is really just making them suffer, and they find themselves in a new relationship with the same person again. Or they might go on a retreat or a workshop and have this beautiful transformative experience and have this higher level of consciousness that they've cultivated over that weekend or that month together. And they go back to the same friends that they were hanging out with before, and that fresh, new feeling starts to fade as their friends treat them the same as they were before they had this experience. And they slowly go back to who they were before. In 1841, Unitarian minister Theodore Parker preached a sermon called The Transient and the Permanent in Christianity. For the previous 4 years, he'd been meeting with a small group of people like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Margaret Fuller, and feeling more and more like the old doctrines were getting in the way of the true Christianity to which he felt called. And he described in that sermon how Christianity had two aspects to it: the permanent, which was of everlasting significance and value, and the transient, the creeds or doctrines that capture a particular moment in time, how people thought about things at a particular point in a particular place, and how when we forget that the transient naturally changes, we can get stuck with it being the same. And then we are in danger of clouding or getting in the way of what is actually of permanent value. And I want to be clear, this isn't just some idle, philosophical, theological noodling about some privileged folks kind of sitting around and contemplating how many angels could dance on the head of a pin. For Theodore Parker in particular, there was a clear, direct application of these ideas. He was an ardent abolitionist. In Howard Zinn's Voices of a People's History, there is only one Unitarian or Universalist who makes an appearance in all of U.S. history. It's Theodore Parker, with his rousing speech to Bostonians in 1854 against the Fugitive Slave Act. As the editors of that book put it, there was a widespread disobedience to the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, which enlisted the powers of the national government to return escaped slaves to their masters. Blacks and whites joined in armed resistance. When they were arrested, it often happened with that juries defying the Fugitive Slave Act themselves would acquit them. In Boston, for instance, in 1851, a man named Shadrach was rescued from a courtroom by 50 blacks, 8 of whom were tried and acquitted. In that same year, the escaped slave Jerry was rescued from a police station in Syracuse. 18 men were indicted, all acquitted. In 1854, President Franklin Pierce dispatched federal troops, joined by state militia and local police, to capture Anthony Burns, a slave who had escaped to Massachusetts from Virginia, and citing the Fugitive Slave Act on May 27th of 1854, Commissioner Edward G. Loring ordered Burns to be returned to slavery in Virginia. The night before, black and white abolitionists used a battering ram against the courthouse doors, but were repulsed. On June 2nd, Burns was marched to the waterfront through streets draped with black cloth and lined with thousands of his supporters, to the sound of church bells tolling, and was forcibly sent back to slavery. And on the eve of Burns' sentencing, the Unitarian abolitionist minister Theodore Parker, a supporter of the rebel John Brown, gave a rousing address to a packed meeting house in Boston. And that night, 13 people were arrested and 1 marshal killed. Parker famously sheltered slaves and kept a revolver in his desk to protect them from being re-enslaved in case anyone should come for them. And he was also one of the small group of ministers who raised money for John Brown's rebellion. Sometimes people ask themselves, if I had lived during slavery, what would I have done? Or if I had lived during the rise of the Third Reich in Germany, what would I have done? Sometimes that sentiment takes the form of, if you've ever wondered what you'd be doing during slavery or the Holocaust or the Civil Rights Movement, you're doing it right now. That's part of what Aaron Bushnell was wrestling with before he committed suicide outside the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. last Sunday. While there is some debate over how to interpret his actions, Bushnell was quite clear. He said, "My name is Aaron Bushnell. I'm an active duty member of the United States Air Force, and I will no longer be complicit in genocide. I'm about to engage in an extreme act of protest, but compared to what people have been experiencing in Palestine at the hands of their colonizers, it's not extreme at all. This is what our ruling class has decided will be normal." He made a conscious decision to act in a particular way. And I lift it up not to say that he should have done that or it's the right thing to do in this situation, but to lift up the degree of consciousness that it demonstrates. Our story this morning is often titled something like Peter Denies Jesus. The problem with that title is that it almost makes it sound like an active decision, when the whole story is actually one where Peter is feeling torn between showing up and being present because he still felt loyal, but also being too scared by the circumstances to actually take a stand, and instead trying to hide. And hiding is something that is easier now than ever. At one point, there was only a small handful of television stations. And then there was cable TV, and there were dozens of stations. And now with streaming, there's tens of thousands of things that you could watch from the safety of your own home, to say nothing of Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or Twitch or Reddit or TikTok, or all sorts of video games with incredible graphics and storylines. There are so many ways that we have, not just we in this room, but we as a society have, of lulling ourselves into a dream that things are different than what they are. Although we live in a society in which there is an ever-deepening gulf between rich and poor, in which intergenerational legacies of racism and sexism wreak havoc on people's health, shortening lives through either immediate violence or chronic instability. Although an outsider could look at all that active and passive violence in our society and call it a war zone, many of us can choose whether or not to be affected. In the words of theologian Ched Myers, people like me are not pulled over for erratic driving and beaten ever. We rarely feel vertigo from the economic gulf We are rarely disturbed by the pop of guns. The country's wars are not fought on our soil. Their carnage is distant. The urban uprisings leave our houses untouched. Their fires are over the hill. Above all, we can choose whether or not to tune into such events. This is life in the United States. And this is our moment of truth. To stay in the dream, which obscures the way things really are, or to struggle for the promise of what this country, this city could be. We can, as Mark's gospel would put it, choose to see or hear or understand the factors that make wars and uprisings inevitable. Or we can live in denial. Sometimes Unitarian Universalists talk about how we are a non-creedal faith. I mentioned creeds earlier in our worship service. We don't have a creed that you need to sign on to in Unitarian Universalism. And when we say that, it's often framed as an example of being a free faith. That as Unitarian Universalists, you shouldn't feel bound to a particular way of understanding or articulating your faith. That you have the authority to decide how to do that for yourself. But really, it's less about authority, and it's more about stuckness. We recognize that any way that we might articulate who we are or what we believe is inherently limited. That there's a danger that we will start to hold on to earlier understandings, to get stuck in thinking that something that was transient, that was true in the past, will always be true. And that's why when our association first created what were the original 6 principles in 1961, one of the key provisions in the bylaws was that they would be reviewed at least every 15 years. Getting stuck isn't just a problem in terms of how we articulate who we are. It's so much bigger than that. It's a matter of life and death. The It Gets Better project, which started in 2010, whose mission is to uplift, empower, and connect lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer youth around the globe, specifically had it as their aim to talk about how things don't stay the same. That there are other possibilities that exist to give hope to youth. Certainly my experiences, even though I'm straight, growing up Unitarian Universalist, having the experience of going to youth group was, things don't have to be as terrible as they are in high school. There can actually be nourishing, welcoming community in the world. In the words of theologian William Stringfellow, we are the beneficiaries of hope, and it is important that we embody the joy of living in that hope. Those possibilities that Sandy was talking about last week, so that others can benefit from it as well. Stuckness, at its core, is an aspect of death. To be alive is to be in motion, to breathe, to learn, to grow, to change, while to halt movement, to come to stillness, is to move into death. That is, in many ways, a part of Buddhism, to contemplate death. And there is no coincidence that stillness is a part of that path. For Sigmund Freud, the death drive was about aggression and people actively acting destructively to one another. But theologically and politically, you could also say the death drive is about stopping change, about trying to hold on to the way things were before. That gives birth to the aggression in the first place. That the current power relationships are preferable to newer, more equitable ones. That leaning into new possibilities of equity and compassion is more dangerous than trying to protect what we already have. That maintaining our familiar cultural perspective is more comfortable than inviting different ways of relating into the world around us. In the end, we choose our discomforts. Either the discomfort of welcoming the new or discomfort of trying to fend it off. The Unitarians kicked off an incredible wave of newness in this country in the early 19th century. Gary Dorian, who's a teacher at Union Theological Seminary in New York, wrote this, The Making of American Liberal Theology. It's the 3-volume work that goes from 1805 up until 2005. And we Unitarians make up the first 100 pages of the first volume because we're the ones who kicked off the cycle that spread to other denominations. While we influenced those other ones, like the Congregationalists, for instance, who were our foes back in the 18th century, they were our arch enemies. The Congregationalists more recently have picked up God is still speaking as a concise way of articulating the importance of this dynamic, evolving understanding that doesn't get stuck. So while we've influenced others, and even the Catholic Church has taken up some movement that they hadn't a couple hundred years ago, we are the only ones that hold it as a core part of who we are. At its core, Protestantism is about not letting convention get in the way of religion. But we Unitarian Universalists are the ones who have been so committed to not letting convention get in the way of our religion that we protested our way out of being an exclusively Christian denomination. And now we also give equal status to people of many other faith paths. It seems that with Aaron Bushnell's wrestling with his commitments and his discomforts, like Unitarian Wynne Bruce, who committed a similar act a couple years ago in response to the climate crisis, or like over 100 others who did similarly in Vietnam and the United States over the Vietnam War, including Florence Beaumont, a 55-year-old Unitarian peace activist, whose husband commented on her death with the words, "She was a perfectly normal, dedicated person who had a deep feeling against the slaughter in Vietnam. The barbarous napalm that burns the bodies of the Vietnamese children has seared the souls of all who, like Florence Beaumont, do not have ice water for blood or stones for hearts. Her death was a supreme sacrifice to humanity, to peace and freedom for all mankind. Like them, he chose a path that he hoped would serve life in the world." While each of these folks decided to try that path in hopes that it would benefit others, there are also so many other paths that one can choose to do so, to hold true to our ideals, in which our own life continues, in which we face the discomfort of standing out with our fellow Unitarian Universalists to proclaim and to take action to build a greater hope that welcomes all. As Unitarians and Universalists have been doing for centuries, like with the anti-slavery activism of Theodore Parker, and as this congregation has been doing with the flags in our building and our public actions and demonstrations around reproductive choice and mobile mental health, to pick just 2 examples, you have it in your power to lean into and cultivate that hope for yourself and for others. Doing so is usually uncomfortable in some way, but not doing so, by us getting stuck in a mode of denial of those to whom we are committed, is also presenting its own discomforts, whether we know it or recognize it or not. And so my invitation to you over this coming week is to contemplate, how could you support others in this congregation in living more true to their ideals and commitments? How could you support others in this congregation in living more truly to their ideals and commitments? The story of Peter's grief at not standing by Jesus is still told to this day. May we be one people who are not conformed to this eon, but instead are transformed by the renewal of the mind in service of what is good and acceptable and wholesome. May we not be paralyzed by our own fear. May we resist the temptation to get stuck in the familiar, hedging our bets until it's too late to offer hope, letting go of whatever illusions we hold about how we might be able to safely stay the same. May we sing hallelujah to the heavens, being inscribed on the pages of life, nurturing the unfurling of our soul's wings. May we be one in pledging ourselves to new understandings of who we are and of what in us is true, and building for tomorrow a nobler world than we have known today. May our hearts be bound, and may they be pointed in a true direction. And may that ever be so.
We've been invited to live true to our ideals. We've been reminded that we are the beneficiaries of hope. We can choose to hear and see. In this congregation, we gather our resources to direct them to build a nobler world than we know today. This month, our Loose Change for Social Change offering will go to Heart International. Faith in Action is collecting loose change for social change for the month of March to specifically support Heart International's Menstrual Health for Gaza initiative, which is, quote, dedicated to distributing menstrual pads along with our hygiene kits to women and girls in Gaza. These kits are more than necessities. They empower recipients to reclaim their health, hygiene, and dignity under extraordinarily challenging conditions, unquote. Heart International is a long-established 501c3 global health humanitarian charity working in 60 countries and has a perfect 100% score from Charity Navigator. This Loose Change for Social Change collection for March coincides with our community's ongoing physical collection through the end of March of menstrual products for local distribution, an effort being led by our own Patricia Riley-Turilla. Please give generously in the tin cups to support the Menstrual Health for Gaza initiative, and please donate purchased products in the collection box in the parish hall to support the needs of economically challenged local women and girls. The money in the baskets goes to the sustaining mission of our congregation. The money in the cups goes to the Loose Change for Social Change Heart International initiative. For those not with us in person today, there is an online link for both one-time and regular donations. May I have 4 volunteers please come forward to carry the baskets and cups. For your prayers, your presence, your service, and your gifts, we are truly grateful. Some other opportunities to learn and grow together are
just wanted to remind you what Pete said. We're still, the Porter County chapter of National Organization for Women is still collecting menstrual products in the box in the sanctuary. Also, there is a flyer on the bulletin board that has a QR code that if you buy anything from Amazon, you can buy from the wish list to also send along. Thank you.
Don't forget, today is Chili Cook-Off Day.
Bring your money.
And your appetite. Now please rise in body or spirit to join in singing number 318, We Would Be One. Please be seated. Do not be conformed to this eon, but instead be transformed by the renewal of the mind, that you may ascertain what is good and acceptable and wholesome. After the postlude, we will extinguish this flame, but we continue to carry in our hearts the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment until we are together again.
Ready, sing. This fire is the power of love and forgiveness. This fire is the power.
Please join us in the parish hall.
Because of the chili cook-off, we won't be having a discussion today.